Democrat J.B. Pritzker, private businessman and philanthropist. Republican Governor Bruce Rauner. He is also a businessman and philanthropist. Libertarian Grayson Cash Jackson, who retired from the Navy after 20 years. Republican State Senator Sam McCann, running on the conservative ticket. Thank you all, gentlemen, for coming. Our forum is a roundtable conversation, not a formal debate. All candidates will not necessarily be asked the same questions. It's a no filibuster zone. I'll be the referee, and I won't hesitate to call off sides, holding, pass interference, or personal foul. While most of the questions will come from me, in the audience are my colleagues. NBC5 Chicago's political reporter Mary Ann Ahern and Telemundo Chicago reporter Carla Leal. You at home can join the conversation on social media by using the hashtag ILGovForum. To begin, I'd like to ask a specific question of each of you. Mr. Pritzker, it's followed you through the primary and now the general election. Let's talk toilets. You've saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in property taxes by having toilets disconnected in your Gold Coast mansion. First of all, who unhooks all their toilets?
Thank you very much, Carol, and thanks to Telemundo and NBC for hosting this debate. First of all, 50,000 people across the county of Cook seek to have their properties reassessed every single year, just like Governor Rauner did, and I sought to have a property tax reassessment too. We were in the middle of a renovation project on our house. We decided to stop that project in the middle of it, and then we sought a reassessment on all of our properties. That was a tax reduction that we received, but we no longer receive that reduction.
Do you consider it a manipulation of the tax system?
No, we followed the rules. In fact, so many people across the state have to seek reassessments because the property tax system is so flawed. Property taxes are so high. We need to lower those taxes, and that's why I put forward a plan for doing just that.
Do they work now?
We, in fact, have restarted that renovation project, so thank you for asking.
Governor Rauner, last December, you said you were, quote, not in charge in Springfield. And the next day you were asked if you wanted to change your statement, but you declined. Are you in charge of state government now?
Everyone in Illinois knows that our state has been under the stranglehold of Mike Madigan and his dominant political machine for decades that has buried our state in deficit spending, in higher taxes, self-dealing corruption. That group, Madigan's supermajority in the General Assembly, has prevented much of the progress we need to make on behalf of the people of Illinois for term limits, for fair maps, for property tax relief, for regulatory relief for our small businesses so we can grow more good-paying jobs. We've made progress in my first term. I'm proud of that progress. We have a long way to go. And we need to come together. Reform-minded Democrats and Republicans and independents come together to stand up against that corrupt political machine and change it.
Do we take that, Governor, as a no?
We take this as us standing together as a people. This election is not a partisan election. This is not about Republican versus Democrat. This is about the people of Illinois coming together to stand against a corrupt political machine that is run by Mike Madigan and that is funded by my opponent, Mr. Pritzker.
Mr. Jackson, you are a retired Navy veteran who has been held in contempt of court for failure to pay child support. Why should voters have confidence that you're prepared to run a $38 billion budgeted business in the state of Illinois?
Well, I think my case is a perfect example of the flaws of our General Assembly. I'm a perfect example of what happens when a member of our communities get caught up into a judicial system that they're woefully and painfully unaware of. I served my country for 20 years. For 20 years, I served this country. And then to come home to Illinois and have to fight to be a father. You see, Lake County, Illinois, much like the rest of Illinois, is setting support orders that sometimes exceed national recommendations by twofold. A judge in Lake County said, sir, you're going to have to turn over 40% of your income starting tomorrow.
Isn't that the judiciary system that you are criticizing, not the legislature?
Absolutely not, because who wrote the laws? Who appoints the men and women sitting over those that work within child support that make these calculations? These are the failures that have continued to occur that are negatively impacting not just myself as a Navy veteran, but our entire state.
Senator McCann, your campaign is funded in large part by the Engineers Political Education Fund in Washington, D.C. That group has contributed over $500,000 to Mike Madigan and the 13th Ward. Some people might look at that and say, you're just a stalking horse for Madigan to take votes away from Governor Rauner, are you?
Exactly.
We're in this to win it. We're in this to be the next governor of Illinois, and I will be in charge. The McCann administration will take charge of state government and be the governor that the people of Illinois have been crying out for the last 4 years, nay, the last 20 years. To your point, I am proud to have the support of those working people. I have stood up strong. I have stood up every day for working people, whether they're union or non-union, public sector or private sector, blue collar or white collar. Proud to have done it, proud to have their support. God bless them.
On that note, Mr. Pritzker, union members of Local 150 of the operating engineers, which has bankrolled Mr. McCann, have actually endorsed you. What explains that?
Well, I think the operating engineers said that about half of their members are Republicans and half of them are Democrats. I presume that they endorsed me because they know that I'll stand up for workers' rights and for raising wages for working families across the state. And I presume that they did not endorse Governor Rauner because he's been abysmal on issues important to working families.
Let's move to taxes, specifically the state income tax, which was raised this year to 4.95%. Mr. Pritzker, Governor Rauner says you want to raise taxes on everybody, and you say that's a lie. But you propose a graduated income tax that so far lacks available specifics. Will you tonight tell voters exactly what tax rates you favor, even if they're not going to be passed, but what you'd like to see so they can make a judgment about what they're likely to pay?
Well, let's start with why we need a fair income tax system. Illinois has the most unfair tax system in the entire nation. That's why we need one. Governor Rauner is standing up for that unfair tax system. I believe we need to change it.
Can we get to the rate, though?
We need to ask the wealthiest people, like Bruce Rauner and me, to pay a higher rate, and we need to provide a tax cut for middle-class families and those who are striving to get there, and lower local property taxes, which is one of the biggest problems we have in the state of Illinois. Governor Rauner has put forward no plan.
So to the rate, do you have a number that you favor?
This is what you should know, that the middle class should get a tax break. That is critically important to me. And remember that most states in the United States have a progressive income tax system, and they're doing far better in job creation.
Do you not want to give a rate?
Pensions, they're doing much better than we are. I believe it's something we've got to negotiate with the people's representatives in the legislature. And remember, it's got to go to a referendum of the people of Illinois before it could become part of our Constitution anyway.
Governor Rauner?
Carol, Mr. Pritzker is dodging your question because he doesn't want to tell the truth to the people of Illinois. He is proposing a massive new income tax hike on all the people of our state. He doesn't want to talk about it because the truth is so painful and politically unpopular. His party in the General Assembly made a mistake strategically a year ago and actually released the likely rates that they're going to put forward. And what it shows is that everybody who makes more than $17,000 a year, everybody pays a higher rate than they do today. And an average middle-class family will pay 26% more in income taxes.
You're lying again.
Mr. Pritzker cannot be trusted when it comes to taxes.
Governor,
This is important, Carol. This is a critically important issue. This election is about taxes and corruption. Two things, taxes and corruption. Mr. Pritzker is a disaster on taxes. He cannot be trusted because he has not paid his taxes by keeping his money in the Bahamas rather than paying taxes, and ripped toilets out of his mansion to dodge his property tax.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Governor Rauner has a casual relationship with the truth. He lied to the Cardinal
You have a casual one with Rod Blagojevich.
He lied about wanting $1 billion tax cut for people when actually proposed a budget budget that would raise taxes, local property taxes, by $1 billion. And he lied about the Quincy Veterans Home, where he covered up his fatal mismanagement. He's been lying for 3.5 years, and now he's lying about me.
Mr. Jackson?
You know what? The entire state and the way that's being run is just painfully flawed. The fact that we continue to elect people like Governor Bruce Rauner, no offense, sir, but you and Mr. J.B. Pritzker have no clue what it is for people like me to live in the conditions that we live in, where we have to struggle every single day to pay our taxes. I owned a home in Lake County, Illinois. When I purchased it, my taxes were $4,500. By the time I sold that home, they were $9,000.
Mr. Jackson, do you have a tax plan?
Absolutely, I do. The only thing that I would like to do, I'd like to keep the flat tax, but everybody living at and below the poverty line, I would like to give them the ability to waive that entire income tax so that they, in effect, can begin to crawl up out of poverty. We have to address those that are living on the lower level and people like myself. The tax rate right now is fine.
Senator McCann, do you have a tax plan?
Yes, I do, and it's called zero-based budgeting. Everybody wants to talk about how much money they're going to pick the pockets of the people. Let's stop talking about how much money it's going to come in, and let's start talking about how we spend it. In state government, we don't spend money based on how much we need this year. We spend it based on how much was spent last year, plus a multiplier. We're going to do away with that. My governor's Office of Management and Budget is going to be instructed to come up with a budget that is determinate of what we really need to spend. And if the legislature won't join us in that fight, I will use the constitutional powers afforded to the governor to use that line item veto, to use the reduction veto to make sure we balance the budget and that we don't overspend the people's money.
Governor Rauner, your campaign is running ads stating that Mr. Pritzker has proposed a vehicle mileage tax. Again, he calls that a lie, and the record seems to indicate it's not exactly what he said. Are you bending the truth a bit?
He was clear in his statements. It's on the record. He said we should look at putting in a vehicle miles tax. And the General Assembly has proposed that to me every year that I've been governor. I've said no. Big government is not what we need in the state of Illinois. Government putting a box in everyone's car, measuring the miles they drive, and taxing people to commute to work, taxing people to get their farm produce to market is wrong. Mr. Pritzker is supporting the General Assembly's idea for a vehicle miles tax.
Mr. Pritzker, did you at least open the door to this?
I have not proposed a vehicle mileage tax, and let me be clear, there are real differences between Bruce Rauner and me when it comes to taxes. He thinks defending a tax system that is the most unfair tax system in the entire nation is the right thing to do. I don't. Remember that people in the bottom 20% of taxpayers are paying a much higher rate of taxes overall than people in the top 1%. He's defending a system that is good for him and that's bad for middle-class taxpayers. I want to cut taxes for the middle class. I want to cut property taxes, and that's why we need a fair income tax.
On another potential revenue issue, and this is just, if you don't mind, just a show of hands on a quick 3 categories. Will you raise your hand if you would consider raising the sales tax on any services? I take that as a no from all of you. Would you consider extending taxes to retirement income? A show of hands. Again, I take that as a no. Not even attorney's fees. I believe Governor Rauner on sales taxes, you once suggested that. And Mr. Pritzker, I thought you opened the door to some possibility of some services, no?
No.
Okay.
May I remark on that? The only way that I would consider that is if we were to restructure the property tax scheme on a consumption tax where on sales and services of goods. If we were to take that money and reallocate that to property tax, that is a much more moral taxation system than doing property taxes. The current property tax structure right now places an undue burden on citizens. It is the largest factor for driving people out of the state right now, and a consumption and service tax is a much more moral transaction because you, the consumer, consent to that tax.
Let's switch gears here. A staggering figure. The state's unfunded pension liability is $129 billion. What will you do, one, to assure retirees they're still going to get their pensions and assure citizens they won't pay more? Senator McCann?
Yeah, first of all, those employees, those retirees, they've paid into the pension system every dime that they were ever supposed to pay. It's actually because of politicians of the past.
So how will you assure
politicians
they'll
of the
get it?
past robbed the pension systems blind, and if that would have happened in the private sector, those people would go to prison.
Got it.
But
How
instead,
will
here in
you-
Illinois, they get reelected. So how we do it? We redo the ramp. The ramp that was instituted in 1995 was a flawed ramp from the very beginning. That ramp has to be redone, and that can be done statutorily and constitutionally, and making sure that everybody gets every dime they're owed, plus freeing up cash in the process.
Mr. Jackson?
You have to get government out of pensions. Anything that government touches, including our pension system.
So how do you do that? And how do you assure
transition it over to a private management 403B or 401K.
Governor Rauner?
Well, how are they going to make the contribution? They can't
Hang on
make
one
the
second.
contributions now. How are they going to make the contributions on a new pension system?
Governor Rauner?
I have proposed to the General Assembly that we do the consideration model pension reform that Democrats who are reform-minded in the General Assembly
That was
have
struck
offered.
down. That was struck down.
Has not been addressed by the courts. I believe that that is constitutional. Many of the Democrats in the General Assembly, including some of the Speaker's staff, have said they believe it's constitutional. We should pass it, put it forward so the courts can...
It's no surprise that billionaires and politicians think taking people's pensions away from them is constitutional. The people I represent in Springfield and downstate Illinois who are counting on those pensions,
Mr. Pritzker.
they think it's constitutional to get the money that they're owed.
What Governor Rauner proposed and suggested late last year was that the federal government should allow the state of Illinois to declare bankruptcy. That's how he wants to deal with pensions. He doesn't want people to get their pensions. That would cost taxpayers in the state tens of billions of dollars because we would immediately go to junk credit status. Remember, under his leadership, we've fallen 8 notches in credit status. We have the lowest credit rating in the entire
Same
nation.
difference.
Bruce didn't do it.
He wants to bankrupt the state. That's how he wants to deal with pensions. Here's what I would suggest to you. There are proposals out there that I think we should look at. One of them suggests that if we put a little bit more into the pension system earlier and flatten out the amortization schedule, that we can pay it and manage our budget. Look, the Supreme Court of the state of Illinois ruled we must pay the pensions that are owed, and I believe that's our moral obligation. It's also our legal obligation.
Shifting gears, Mr. Pritzker, 3 downstate Democrats running for the Illinois House voiced support for term limits for its legislative leaders, including House Speaker Mike Madigan. Is it time for Speaker Madigan to step aside as the leader of the Democrats? I know you don't get a vote on it, just looking for an opinion.
Well, let's say I don't think that people should serve for decades in leadership posts in Springfield, and I favor legislative leadership term limits. That's a good idea. They've imposed it in the Senate. They should impose it in the House. In my view, that's the right way to go. I also believe that we should get rid of gerrymandering in the state because I want more competitive elections in Illinois.
I think everybody knows your opinion of Speaker Madigan at this point and your push for term limits in general. But Republican leader Bill Brady's been in the Senate for 16 years and Jim Durkin, your leader in the House, for 12. Is it time to term limit them?
Everyone in state government, from the governor to typical rank and file members of the General Assembly, should be term limited. I believe statewide officers should be term limited at 8 years. Legislators should be term limited at 10 years. And we should also have an end to gerrymandering and have bipartisan maps. Mr. Pritzker is falsely claiming that he supports term limits and the end of gerrymandering. He has personally funded Mike Casper. Mike Casper is Madigan's attorney who personally sued to block term limits and fair map reforms.
That's not true. I
Mr.
supported
Pritzker
the
has funded him.
Maps movement.
Neither one of
the
them
record
fair
of my
maps.
support.
Neither one of you guys. You wouldn't even come over to the Tribune to debate.
Mr. Jackson, are you for term limits?
Absolutely. I'm for term limits. I'm for cutting their salaries. I'm for cutting their pensions.
Okay, let's just stick with term limits. Senator McCann, you're in the Senate.
First of all, I would like everyone to know that when I ran in 2010, I said I would serve no more than 10 years in the Senate, and then I would go home. I have term limited myself. I'm a man of my word.
How many years have you got?
At the end of this term, it will be 8 years. I term limited myself, and I stood by it, and I believe in term limits for everyone.
It's time to switch over to my colleague, Mary Ann Ahern. Mary Ann.
Carol, I am with Barbara Lumpkin, who is the interim president and CEO of the Chicago Urban League. Barbara, your question.
Governor Rauner, in 2017, the state lost a net of 33,000 Illinois residents. This is particularly significant for the African American community. Tell me, what will you do to stem the tide of people leaving our state?
It is the most important question facing us. It's the reason I ran for governor. Illinois has had a massive outmigration of people who could choose what state to live in. If it weren't for immigration from outside the U.S., both legal and illegal, Illinois' population would be down over 1 million people over the last 20 years. The challenge is lack of economic opportunity, brutally high unemployment in too many of our communities, brutally high property taxes, income taxes. That comes from a broken system of deficit spending and to cover it up, higher and higher taxes. That's what my opponent, Mr. Pritzker, stands for. Higher taxes, more power to Mike Madigan and his corrupt political machine. I am fighting to change the system, bring regulatory relief to our businesses, help them grow and create more good paying jobs, and reform the government so we can bring down our property taxes and our income tax.
Let's be clear that there are two big causes of all the outmigration that have occurred in the state of Illinois. One of them is high property taxes, which has disproportionately impacted African-American communities and lower-income communities. If you own a $250,000 valued house or a $200,000 valued house in Harvey, you might be paying $10,000 a year in property taxes. That's just wrong. That's why a fair tax system is so important. Now, the other reason that people are leaving the state is because Bruce Rauner has so severely underfunded our higher education system. 72,000 college students chose not to go to school in the state of Illinois. And when they leave our state, they don't come back. 70% of them don't come back, and sometimes their parents leave with them.
Mr. Jackson.
We have to reform every single aspect of our government. There is zero transparency. Our legislators are running around.
Let's talk about outmigration.
And that's exactly what I'm getting to.
But we're not going to do the whole government
is a
at once.
root cause of how the policies in this state have failed continuously. We don't hold our legislators accountable. They have a constitutional, I swore an oath to the Constitution for 20 years. I know what it means. But you have a constitutional obligation to pass a balanced budget, didn't do it for over 2 years, place the state in the state of affairs that it's in, and people
Senator
continue
McCain.
to lose.
Thank you, Carol. So at the Capitol, I have business leaders from all over the state come and speak to me all the time, and then there's a common thread that runs through their requests. In order to grow and to stay and to keep the families here they employ and to bring other families here, the two primary asks they have are strong infrastructure systems and safe, clean neighborhoods with good schools. And so first and foremost, you can't have a strong infrastructure system if you don't partner with the federal government. I look forward as governor of Illinois to partnering with our congressional delegation, partnering with the Trump administration, actually having a relationship with the president and the administration, because you can't have a good infrastructure plan if you don't leverage
Senator.
the federal dollars.
Carla Leal has a question in the audience from Telemundo. Carla.
Thank you, Carol. This year, the state of Illinois has been the center of several investigations by the U.S. Immigration or ICE officers, and these have resulted in the detention of undocumented immigrants with and without criminal backgrounds. What is, if any, immigration reform would you support to try and help those undocumented immigrants with no criminal background? Mr. Pritzker, let's start with you.
We need comprehensive immigration reform at the federal level, and we need to strengthen the Trust Act at the state level. I'm glad that Governor Rauner signed the Trust Act, but there's so much more that we need to do. Remember, I'm only here because my great-grandfather arrived here at age 10 with nothing. He was penniless, and he was a refugee from a country where he would have been killed. And it wasn't that he had no place to live. He was given one by a social service agency of the state of Illinois. He was given the security and safety of the United States. And he was given the opportunity to go to a good public school and a good public university. And so I'm grateful. And I believe that it's our obligation to stand up for immigrants in this state. And I will do that as governor.
Governor?
We agree, Mr. Pritzker and I, on the need for comprehensive immigration reform. We need to change our system. It's broken. We make legal immigration far too difficult, and we make illegal immigration far too easy. We should end illegal immigration because it takes away jobs from Americans, it holds down wages, it hurts union workers, factory workers, farm workers. But America is built by immigrants. We should streamline and support legal immigration for people who want to come here, work hard, and become citizens. We have far too many restrictions. We should expand the visa system, expand the ability for anyone who gets a college degree here to stay here. We should keep our hardworking immigrant families.
Senator McCain, you recently filed legislation to reverse House Bill 40, which in part allows equal access, regardless of income, to abortion services. The bill was passed by the legislature, signed by the governor, but some people see it as an effort by you to politically jam the governor. Your response?
First and foremost, I am very pro-life. I'm about the most pro-life person you'll ever meet and very proud of that. I think it's reprehensible that the taxpayers of Illinois are required to pay for taxpayer-funded abortion on demand. I have even had pro-choice constituents come to me and say that. The reason I filed that bill was to back it up, to walk the walk, not just talk the talk, and to show people that we do have a plan. And interestingly enough, the governor is seated 2 days before the new General Assembly, so I look forward to pushing that bill through the General Assembly and signing my own bill.
Governor Rauner,
on
if House Bill 40 was reversed, would you veto it?
I said 5 years
Signed
ago.
No,
and
if you succeeded in your bill.
I've said 5 years ago, and I will say again today, I support a woman's right to decide, and I do not believe her income should determine whether she has that right. And Carol, let me also say, Mr. McCann has been given far too much airtime in this discussion. He is a phony candidate.
Get used to it, brother.
He has received
Get used to it.
funding from Mike Madigan for his campaign. He was put on the ballot by Mike Madigan's attorney.
You're a liar. You've been lying to the people of Illinois from the very beginning. You said you would have no social agenda, and all you've been able to accomplish is to make yourself the most progressive, liberal governor the state of Illinois has ever had. You're a liar and a thief.
Senator,
Mr. McCann, are you getting paid on a per interruption basis by Madigan or on a lump sum?
Here, I'm getting paid by the people to be here today.
He has one purpose on being on that stage and to help Mr. Pritzker be victorious for Mike Madigan.
No,
That's why
we're here
Mr.
to
McCann
take both of you out. Because you signed the Trust Act, we're going to repeal the Trust Act.
I have another question.
Speak, gentlemen.
It doesn't deal with the duties of the office of governor.
May I speak?
Just a second.
Okay.
But I'd like your thoughts on free expression.
Okay.
Where do you stand? Where do you stand on the controversy surrounding Colin Kaepernick and NFL players taking a knee, Mr. Jackson?
Great question. And this has really been a difficult one to kind of go back and forth with, especially amongst the veteran community. Look, I may not agree with what Colin Kaepernick did or where he chose to do it, but he got that recommendation from a veteran. To do it in the method that he did it to extend respect to veterans, to extend respect to the flag. And I may not agree with what he's doing or why he's doing it, but I fought to defend his right to do it. But he must understand that doing it at your work, you must go ahead and endure the private ramifications that come from that. And I believe that he's done a fantastic job about holding up under that scrutiny.
Do you agree, Mr. Pritzker?
I believe that we all need to remember why Colin Kaepernick was protesting in the first place. I think that's gotten lost here, and that's because he was standing up protesting the use of excessive force against people of color, something extraordinarily important in our city and in our state to consider. Of course, I believe in people's right to express themselves and believe in their First Amendment rights. My father was a veteran, my grandfather a veteran. I want to honor our veterans, and I think our veterans were fighting for people to have the right to free speech.
We're going to take a break, and we will be back in 60 seconds. Welcome back. We're going to continue now. Carla Leal from Telemundo again. Carla?
Thank you, Carol. I'm joined by Jeffrey Chen from the Union League Club of Chicago, and he has a question. Mr. Chen.
Thank you. While no part of the state is immune to gun violence, it is especially prevalent in Chicago. What do you believe are the most effective ways to address this epidemic, and what can you do as governor?
Mr. Pritzker, let's start with you.
Well, first of all, Governor Rauner cut the very services that people rely upon, the things that will actually reduce gun violence, 2 years without a budget in the state of Illinois, failing to fund things like violence interruption services, like cure and like combating combating violence on the streets. I believe we need to get rid of the implements of those violence that are illegal that are on our streets. Remember, they're pouring over the borders from neighboring states. We've got to stem the flow of those. And of course, we ought to ban bump stocks and ban high-capacity magazines and pass a gun dealer licensing bill. But it's extraordinarily important that we also remember that in the face of these mass shootings and what's going on the streets of Chicago and Rockford and Springfield and Peoria, that we need to step up to the plate and make sure that we're providing not only the legislation that will stem the flow of those guns, but also legislation and a budget that will pay for services that people so badly need.
Governor Rauner.
First and foremost, it's about jobs. The best antidote to a gun is more jobs in a neighborhood. Mr. Pritzker and his partner, Mr. Madigan, support more taxes, more regulations on business that have given Illinois some of the highest unemployment rates in America in too many of our communities. It's about jobs first. Secondly, I signed legislation to help deal with public safety and still respect the Second Amendment. 72-hour waiting period for guns, red flag to take guns away from those deemed mentally unstable or dangerous, and also a bill to crack down on illegal shipment of guns across borders. I've also recommended to the General Assembly
checks on gun.
Mr. Pritzker,
let's let it go.
Mr. Pritzker, please. We have recommended to the General Assembly. They have refused to pass so far, but I've recommended to them that we have resource officers in our schools where the schools would like to have them, that we have a bump stock ban, that we have truth in sentencing for violent offenders, and that we bring back the death penalty for those who are guilty beyond any doubt whatsoever of committing mass murder or killing our police officers.
Mr. Jackson?
My opponents fail to understand that they have to swear an oath to the Constitution. The evidence does not support that more gun legislation is going to make us any safer. More people are killed in Chicago every year with hands and fists, not with an AR-15, not with a bump stock. What is causing the violence? We have to get to the root causes. A failed war on drugs, incarcerating thousands upon thousands, generations of fathers who are trying to provide for their family. They did it on a black market. They sold drugs. Drugs that are not a criminal issue. They are a health issue. We need to address those things first. We need to restore the family unit. And then we also I would agree with Governor Rauner, we need to create jobs.
Senator
Where has that
McCann.
focus been?
Yeah, first and foremost, I spent the last 24 hours in Chicago, been watching some of your newscasts, and I am absolutely amazed at the number of stories that you report on. Your whole newscast is nothing but violent crime after violent crime after violent crime. It's actually appalling. So I look forward to reaching out to President Trump and asking for his assistance to come to Chicago, to bring his Department of Justice, to crack down on this, to bring justice, to bring law and order to Chicago and the state of Illinois.
And you believe the Chicago police are not doing that?
Based on the newscasts I've watched the last 24 hours, it does not appear
They
that
don't have enough officers to investigate.
I totally support the police officers, but the politicians are hamstringing them.
Governor Rauner, when you vetoed the legislation to require gun dealers to be licensed, and you talked about the federal government already doing it, why not add another layer of safety? Why not put one more layer in?
All that bill would do is to take away even more jobs, cause more unemployment in Illinois communities, and not increase public safety. I've been clear about what bills could increase public safety. I've outlined those earlier tonight. The simple, biggest fact is we need more jobs and more economic growth in the state. We have many challenges: violence, unemployment, crime, poverty, need to fund our pensions, need to fund our health care, need to fund our education. The only way we solve those problems is with stronger economic growth. And if we don't get stronger economic growth, we will solve none of those problems. My opponent, Mr. Pritzker, wants higher taxes and more power to Mike Madigan. That will drive employers out of this state and make our problems worse. We need lower taxes to grow our economy.
Cut mental health services, when you cut substance abuse treatment, that is what helps to increase violence on the streets. And you don't understand that. You know, people who want to get jobs want to get trained, and you cut funding for people who would get skills training. I mean, I think you've got it all backward, Governor.
Mr. Pritzker, you know, it's easy for you to sit on the sidelines and criticize when you haven't done an honest day's work in your life.
That's just...
You Mr. Pritzker, you are not addressing the core issues that we need to fix. Pension reform, job creation, corruption.
And when are you going to get around to that, Governor? You've been the governor for 4 years. This is a speech. This is something a governor, somebody who was running,
your solutions will make things worse.
What have you been doing for the last 4 years? Nothing.
During the course of my life, I've stood up for working families all across the state of Illinois. I've expanded early childhood education. I've been a national leader on it. I've expanded school breakfast programs for the low-income kids across the state. In fact, I've created thousands and thousands of jobs by founding the world's best small business incubator. Governor Rauner fired people that started businesses. He's created fewer jobs in the same time period as his predecessor, who he said was a miserable failure at job creation.
Turn right now and go to Marianne Ahern. Marianne.
Carol, the registration information for some 76,000 voters in Illinois may have been compromised by foreign hackers in 2016. Do you believe the state has done enough to ensure election security? And also, what additional steps would you take to make sure voters feel safe? Governor Rauner?
Absolutely. We have taken Illinois from one of the weakest states on cybersecurity and digital sophistication to now one of the best. We've invested in our infrastructure, in our IT systems. Our Department of Innovation and Technology and our computer services in the government, we've lent their skills, they're some of the best in the country, to our state elections board, which is its own independent agency. We've significantly increased the security of those systems, and I believe we will continue to improve that every day going forward.
Senator McCann.
We have not done enough. I believe again, Governor Rauner and Mr. Pritzker, I believe, has also indicated that he does not respect our president. He does not respect the current administration. Neither one of these gentlemen want to reach out and work with our federal government enough. You cannot have enough cybersecurity when you refuse to work with the federal government.
Mr. Jackson?
Why are we worried about the hackers when right here, our General Assembly, the Democrats and Republicans continue to rig elections year after year? Year after year. I mean,
it's a good point.
It's absolutely absurd that we're focusing on Russia, and right here in my own backyard, right here in Chicago, I mean, the news stories have flooded out of here for decades about the gerrymandering and the ballot access laws. I mean, I had to get 50,000 signatures to get on the ballot.
So you're not worried about cybersecurity?
Y'all needed 5,000.
We're going to switch back to something all of you raised.
May I respond to?
Go ahead.
I think it's important to point out that the governor's done nearly nothing about this, actually. He refuses to take us out of the cross-check system, which is a failed system that we should be out of already. He's failed at the computer upgrade system for the state of Illinois. I don't see why anybody would trust him to secure the ballot box for people when he's failed at all of those things. And frankly, 3.5 years in, you've accomplished nearly nothing and failed as governor.
Let's talk about the death penalty. One last law and order question here. Governor Rauner, you called for the reinstatement of the death penalty for some capital crimes. Mr. Pritzker, in Chicago, 9-year-old Tyshawn Lee was lured from a playground into an alley and murdered execution style. In heinous crimes such as that, would you make a qualification on your opposition to the death penalty? Would you agree to it?
Those crimes are horrific, and the people who are responsible for them should be held accountable. Let's remember that we banned the capital punishment in the state of Illinois many years ago. In fact, I funded a program called the Center on Wrongful Convictions that helped to write that ban on the death penalty. The problem is that so many people are convicted of crimes who, it turns out 5 or 10 years later, they didn't actually commit the crime. And so it's important for us to remember that. I believe that we should have strong laws holding people accountable for these heinous crimes, and they should serve the rest of their lives in prison.
Governor, studies suggest that states without the death penalty have consistently lower murder rates. Plus, as Mr. Pritzker points out, Illinois has a terrible reputation about getting it wrong. Is there a consideration that you would make about your position?
Carol, we have an issue of violent crime in Illinois. The far bigger issue we have in the state of Illinois is corruption and self-dealing. That's why I stand so firmly against Mr. Pritzker and his candidacy. He has completely shown to the people of Illinois the lack of integrity, the lack of character.
This was a question about the death penalty.
And the bigger problem is corruption. Mr. Pritzker cheating on his income tax by keeping his money offshore, ripping toilets out of a mansion.
Okay, so as long as we're going to switch subjects, let's go to public universities.
Can I at least
McCann,
respond to that?
We're going to hang on, okay? Hang on. We'll come back.
Okay.
Senator McCann, one of the great uncertainties for the last several years has been the funding of state universities. Educators believe both Republicans and Democrats have failed them. Can you tonight give an absolute 100% guarantee to funding MAP grants for students or full funding for higher education?
And first of all, I have to agree with them that Republicans and Democrats have failed them. That's why I'm running as a newly formed Conservative Party candidate. And yes, I give them a 100% guarantee because I see higher education as an investment, not an expense. It's an investment that we cannot afford not to make.
Mr. Jackson, would you guarantee full funding of MAP grants in universities?
I can't do that. I cannot guarantee anything given the state of the General Assembly. If we don't put common sense people in there that understand that the more money we take from people, the more recklessly we spend, the more that our government grows, I can't make any promises until we start replacing a lot of the General Assembly.
Governor Rauner, is that a promise that could be made?
I've dedicated my life to improving education far before I became governor. I've set record funding for K-12 schools, record funding for early childhood education, historic school choice, tuition scholarship tax credits for low-income families, equal funding for charter schools. And in my second term, I will reverse the years of underfunding of our universities, just as I reversed a decade of education cuts for Madigan's majority in the General Assembly. I've reversed that, and I will reverse the higher education funding cuts that have happened.
Virtually everything that you just tried to take credit for happened in spite of you, not because of you. 736 days without a budget in this state, longer than any state in the history of the United States. A $16 billion backlog racked up because of your failed management of the state, $1 billion of late payment fees that the taxpayers had to pay for, and eight credit downgrades. We're now the worst rated credit in the entire nation. 5 universities, and this is your point, 5 universities under your watch have fallen to junk credit status, and you're the biggest deficit spender in the history of the state of Illinois. I mean, you are a failed governor. You have failed every single year of your term. It is abominable to me, and it's time for a change in this state.
Mr. Pritzker, I will respond to that and simply say this. Your lack of integrity, your lack of character, you're cheating on your property taxes, you're cheating on your income tax, you're trying to use your inherited wealth to buy political office from imprisoned Rod Blagojevich.
It is time.
This is fundamentally wrong. Your lack of integrity.
You have lied about your record.
You're not worthy of public office.
Let's talk about some other fundamental issues, the third airport being one of them. The state of Illinois, as all of you may know, has spent $97 million buying thousands of acres of land around what would be the South Suburban Airport. It's a lot of money. A lot of potential jobs are at stake. It's been studied endlessly, so we don't need, apparently, more studies. As governor, one of you, would you be for or against that project? Really, just a yes or no. Senator McCann?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson?
No.
Governor Rauner?
No.
Mr. Pritzker?
Well, we need to make sure we're not taking jobs away from the other 2 major airports. But in light of that, to make sure, if we can make sure that we're not taking jobs away, then I really believe that we should look seriously at building that airport.
Mr. Pritzker, hotel workers are striking across Chicago over wages and benefits, including picket lines at the Hyatt, owned by your own family members. Do they have a legitimate complaint?
They do, and in fact, they're being heard. I stand up for collective bargaining rights. I believe that the workers are, in fact, picketing because they want health care coverage. It's something that I've proposed for the state of Illinois, expanding health care coverage for everyone. We can do that in the state. It won't cost the taxpayers anything. We can introduce President Obama's idea for a public option, which will allow people to buy into the Medicaid system at a much lower rate than they would a private health insurance system, and give small businesses the opportunity to offer health insurance to people across the state. I stand up for the workers and their rights and their right to collectively bargain.
Carol, it's important that we respond to that line of baloney we just heard. Mr. Pritzker and his family turned the heat lamps on striking workers on at the Park Hyatt during the summer heat.
Involved in management of this company.
Mr. Pritzker owns a company called JBP Manufacturing. He is trying to decertify the union right now while the union is negotiating with him.
Mr. Pritzker
owns a cruise company in the Bahamas where he's blocking unionization efforts right as we speak. Mr. Pritzker is not honest about saying
one
that he
lie
supports
after
unions.
another.
So,
the
Governor Rauner,
continues.
I take it you would not cross the picket line. You're sympathetic to the workers?
I support freedom of choice. I support policies that will create more union jobs in this state by making Illinois a booming economy with manufacturing blossoming in every community and people able to join a union if they want to.
Governor
Rauner
higher
wants
wages
to
lower wages for people in the state. He wants to lower workplace safety because he thinks if we have a low-wage state that businesses will flock to Illinois. I think you want a governor who's standing up for higher wages and
we have to
health care.
Mr. Jackson, would you cross that picket line?
Would I cross it and join them?
Would you cross the picket line? Would you observe the picket line? Are you sympathetic or not?
Absolutely. You know what? I've been a political activist for a couple of years, speaking out against a lot of the things happening across this country. But to JB's point over there, talking about medical coverage, look, the expansion of Medicaid and government and healthcare is what is the direct result for the inflated cost right now. We have to get government out of healthcare. We don't want them in it more. I spent 20 years dealing with healthcare with the military.
Mr. McCann,
you don't want that.
Senator McCann, would you cross the picket line? Are you sympathetic to the workers in this strike?
My record has shown, I have proven that I will be there for all workers, union and non-union. It's interesting that the governor hasn't been able in 4 years to get a contract with the largest union representing all the state workers, the majority of the state workers in the state of Illinois. He famously said in his first campaign that he would be willing to shut the government down just to destroy that union. So, yeah, he's all about unions.
Senator, we have just 1 minute before we move on. Your website has about 7 paragraphs and 329 words. It's pretty spare, but it seems to blame Chicago and Chicago politicians for most things. Do you feel that downstate is being harmed by Chicago?
I most certainly do. Downstate has not had its rightful place at the table for decades. When I ran for the state senate in 2010, I proudly said that I would be a loud, booming voice for downstate Illinois, and I promise you that I will be a loud, booming voice for downstate Illinois in the suburbs.
It's not just Chicago, it's the whole state. It's the entire state.
Mr. Pritzker, when was the last time you went grocery shopping?
Maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago.
And Governor Rauner, last time for you?
Last weekend.
Last weekend. Governor, what do you pay for a gallon of milk?
Paid $2.49.
Whole Foods, $3.99, same time, $2.49 at Jewel. Right answer. Mr. Pritzker. Cost of a loaf of sliced bread?
About $2.25.
At Jewel, cost of a loaf of butternut whole wheat was $2.49. On sale, $1.79. Whole Foods, $2.79 in the ballpark. Do you feel that you pay the proper amount for a haircut? For instance, Governor Rauner, what do you pay for that with a tip?
We were talking about the difference between downstate and Chicago a little earlier. I've been going to the same barber here in Chicago for 31 years. Inflation here, I'm paying up about $27 now, which I don't have enough hair to justify.
With the tip?
In Springfield, when I get haircuts there, it's $13 without the tip.
What's the tip?
Generally another 10.
Okay. Senator McCann, what do you pay for a haircut?
I typically pay $11 for the haircut at Ballinger's Barbershop in Carlinville, Illinois, and I usually give them a $2 to $3 tip.
Mr. Jackson.
My good friend Tanya on the naval base up at Great Lakes Naval Station, she's been cutting my hair for about 4 years, and I pay a little over $8.
With a tip?
A little bit more with a tip, about $12.
Mr. Pritzker?
I pay about $35, and the tip is usually about $10. I like to be generous.
Okay. Governor Rauner and Mr. Pritzker, in running for governor, you both have spent millions of dollars of your own money. Since 2013, Governor Rauner, your total, by our estimates, $94 million. In the last 2 years, Mr. Pritzker, it's $126 million. Does that in any way, Mr. Pritzker, embarrass you?
No, I think this race is about values, not about money. It's about what we've been doing our whole lives to stand up for working families across the state. And, you know, standing up and expanding early childhood education in the state of Illinois, making sure that kids get school breakfast, making sure that we're creating jobs. You know, I led the Human Rights Commission.
We're talking about the money
stand
now.
up for people who've been discriminated against in their jobs. And it's about values to me. I mean, that is what this race is really about. It's about whether you want somebody who lies consistently, who has taken services away from 1 million people in the state of Illinois.
So it's a reasonable amount of money to put into a campaign?
I really believe that shouldn't be the question. I also believe in campaign finance reform, which the governor does not believe in.
So, Governor,
I think that we need to change the system in Washington, D.C.
You believe it, you do it.
In Washington, D.C., they have opened this floodgate.
You don't spend $200 million.
And it's Governor Rauner that wrote a $50 million check to start his campaign and took $20 million from the wealthiest man in the state of Illinois.
So, Governor Rauner, is it an embarrassing amount of money for you to spend that much?
Carol, I agree with Mr. Pritzker that this election is about values. My grandparents lived in a double-wide trailer. I did not inherit a nickel. I worked hard for 32 years working for teachers and police officers in Illinois and across the country, helping them have a better retirement. I made them billions of dollars, and I'm proud of it, so they could have a better retirement and save taxpayers hundreds of millions of taxes as a result. Mr. Pritzker, and this is the critical issue of this campaign, Mr. Pritzker has inherited billions of dollars. There's nothing wrong with that, but what's unethical and just deceitful is for him to keep that money in the Bahamas, where he does not pay any taxes, to own a mansion, take the toilets out so he does not pay his proper taxes, and to use his inherited wealth, use your inherited wealth
so, Mr.
to try to
Jackson,
buy political office from Rod Blagojevich. Shame on you, Mr. Pritzker.
Jackson,
shame on you.
Mr. Jackson, how much have you spent on your campaign?
Business on the back porch of the governor's.
See, what my opponents are demonstrating is their lack of concern or respect for their opponents over here. They're pretending as though we do not exist. I spent $25,000. You two gentlemen spent what, $200 million to get on this stage? Who's the fiscally minded guy? I'm spending less than $1,000 for a percent in the poll. You guys are spending $400,000.
Mr. Senator McCann, how much have you spent?
You know, so far we have spent under $1 million. These two guys will each spend more on paper clips than we spend on our whole campaign. I think Citizens United is the greatest threat to our republic today. And really, these two guys on the end are just the different sides of the same coin. They're trying to buy their way into office. I hope the people see through it and don't allow them to do so.
Don't.
Amaya Pawar, former alderman, said to us that when money equals voice, the more money you have, the more voice you have. And that's problematic. You don't see that?
That's why we need campaign finance reform in the state of Illinois. Now, you remember that it was Governor Rauner who wrote these enormous checks up front. In December of 2016, no one else was running. Why would he do that? Because he wants to scare everybody out of the system. He doesn't want to run.
Mr. Pritzker's outspending me 3-1 in this election.
Me
3-1
at the very beginning of the race, even during a Democratic primary, because he was scared to run against me. The truth of the matter is Governor Rauner has got to go. He has spent so much money trying to craft an image, but the truth is his image is a complete lie. The man has done nothing to create jobs. He's done nothing to expand health care for people in the state, and he's done nothing to make it easier for people to go to college.
We're going to go to a final question. Yes, Mr. Jackson, you're going to get the final question. As we come close to the end of this broadcast, when somebody says Springfield, I think a lot of people automatically think political dysfunction. So, Mr. Jackson, as a conservative and as a libertarian, how do you end that in Springfield? Or do you want to?
I do want to. I think we have to recognize and understand that, look, over 50% of our state, they're moderates. They're independents. They don't align. They're not very conservative. They're not very liberal. But they've put a perfect demonstration of what politics is like in the General Assembly. And this is why we don't have a productive conversation. This is why nothing ever gets done. We have to begin to elect people that come from our neighborhoods, that understand what it is to struggle day in and day out, and they can sit down and have a conversation and break bread and share a beer. When we can do those things, we can move beyond the partisan politics that these two guys have been demonstrating up here, and we can begin to move our state forward, because then real people are coming together. They're discussing real solutions, because you know what? You're living the same damn problems that I am every single day.
Senator McCann.
Yeah, first and foremost, we're going to bring leadership to the table. The governor says that Madigan's in charge. He won't let him play with his toys. He complains that Sam keeps butting in and bothering him. While he can go back home, or he can go to Italy, I guess, if that's where he wants to go. He can go to Italy. I look forward to being in the governor's mansion and actually being the leader that the people of this state need.
Mr. Pritzker.
Well, let's remember that the governor never seems to want to accept any responsibility for his failures. He said that, he's not in charge. And he said that Jeannie Ives was a stooge of Mike Madigan. In fact, he's not been able to go on the stage for 5 minutes without mentioning Madigan's name and blaming him or blaming somebody else for his problems. The truth is, to end the dysfunction in Springfield, you need a governor who will work across the aisle, who will actually get big things done. I've demonstrated that during the course of my life. We need to get big things done for this state. We have real fiscal challenges, and
big spending, big taxes, big corruption.
Services that he's destroyed that so many working families rely upon.
Governor Rauner, last word here.
Carol, this election is about two things: taxes and corruption. Taxes and corruption. Mr. Pritzker stands for raising the income tax on the middle class, 26%.
That's just not true.
He stands for a vehicle miles tax. He stands for supporting Mike Madigan and the corruption of that machine.
I would like to
continue
this, but we have to stop. We thank you for joining us, all four of you, and we thank all of you in the audience for being with us. A special thanks to the Urban League and the Union League Club of Chicago. The candidates have been invited to answer questions after the forum. They have much more to say. It will be live streamed on NBC Chicago's website and on our app. You can view the complete forum on our app, as well as the election in November 6th, which you should vote if you choose to. Now let's have a round of applause for our candidates. From the NBC Tower, I'm Carol Marin. Thank you and good night.